Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast brought to you by Seat Tires. This is DJ and I'm your host from London for this week. I've got with me Varun from Singapore, who's the usual co-host of this podcast, but we have two very, very special guests, right? And this is going to be a very interesting and slightly different episode. So I've got with me Nishad Pai Vaidya. A second time guest on this show. He's been on this show back in February, and a first time guest on this show, Sachin Bajaj. Now, Nishad and Sachin have written a fantastic book about the year 1971 called Twice Upon a Time. So when we saw that, we were super excited to bring you guys onto the show to talk to us about that year in Indian cricket and why it's important. Now, Varun and I were both born in 1985. Nishad was born a lot later than that. So we're very interested in finding out why that year was important, why it's suddenly come into the news. We've seen about 3 books written about it in the last year. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But first, guys, let me just welcome you all to the show. Nishad, thank you for joining us again on the show. And Sachin, great to have you as a first-time guest.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be on with you guys.
And as I say, always up and ready for the Edges and Sledges podcast. One tip, one hand is the way to go.
Absolutely. Varun, how are you doing, man? Singapore's back in lockdown, I hear. Are you managing okay without any live cricket on your television?
I have got French Open on. There is NBA on tomorrow. I think tomorrow the England-New Zealand test starts. So there is live sport. There's just no India sports going on.
Correct. But Ashwin is absolutely disappeared from the podcast. He's going to be the new guest appearance, I feel. Maybe we'll get a show featuring him soon.
Well, that's because US has opened up, man. So he's living his life.
Awesome. So Ashwin, obviously our third co-podcaster is traveling around the US. I think he was in the Grand Canyon in Vegas last week. So well done on him. But guys, we're here to talk about cricket and the year 1971. Now, as I said, this will be a slightly different show from usual. Usually we talk about stuff that's happening or current events. Right now, we're going back in history 50 years. And so Varun and I are pretty much going to be students on this podcast while Nishad and Sachin educate us about the year 1971. So, Sachin, let me come to you first. Why the sudden interest in the year 1971 in the year 2021?
71 is a very landmark year in India. One of the selfish reasons for me why 1971, because I was born in 1971. But for me too, if I have to name 10 of the greatest Indians of all time, they were landmark years for both of them. 1971. Madam Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, who was, I reckon, our greatest prime minister. And what happened with Bangladesh, she took on all the international superpowers. And then we had the emergence of Sunil Gavaskar. Now I'll give you a very good example. Our dates in the world are known as before Christ BC and after death of Christ AD. We are in the AD era. Indian cricket is known as before Sunil Gavaskar emerged, that's 1971, and the era of Sunil Gavaskar and after he emerged. So he is a landmark era of Indian cricket where people talk of before his era, during his era, and after his era. And 50 years to commemorate it was a paradigm shift in Indian cricket. We had never won 2 overseas series ever before in the same year. We had won in New Zealand before, but to go to West Indies and beat West Indies as underdogs and to go to England and beat the mighty England in England then was absolutely fantastic. It was not expected. And full credit to Vaidya and his team for having put us on the world map. It is then that everyone says 1983. It is in 1971 we emerged on the cricketing stage with self-respect and as a semi-superpower. That's why 71.
Very interesting. And Nishad, the title Twice Upon a Time. Now, obviously, we talk about fairy tales starting with Once Upon a Time. So is that what you're trying to convey with that title? 2 overseas series wins in a single year. I don't think, has it ever been done after that?
Well, actually, I don't think it's been done after that because, especially you consider the way India used to travel back then. The last overseas series they had before that, they had They had again traveled back to back, which was Australia and New Zealand in 1967 and 68. And in fact, in 68 in New Zealand, India had won the series there. And then they had gone through a difficult time. And then obviously with the change of captaincy in early 1971, remember that was also landmark because Nawab of Pataudi, who had held the captaincy in the 1960s, he was taken off captaincy and Ajit Wadekar was thrust into the role. And he's got this assignment. He's not playing at home. Immediately he has to go to West Indies and England. And let me just give you a couple of statistics that actually put into perspective the kind of challenge that these guys had when they embarked upon those two tours, because West Indies and England were two territories where they didn't have happy memories. Remember in 1962, the captain Ajit Wadekar was hit on the head by a ball from Charlie Griffith in a tour game at Barbados. And then, of course, Nawab of Pataudi took midway through the series. Psychologically, it was a blow. India lost that series 5-0 in the West Indies. And after that, they were going to the West Indies. So here are some of the statistics. In 10 test matches in the West Indies, up until that point, India had lost 6. And out of those 6, 5 they had lost in the previous tour in 1962. In England, they had played 19 test matches, which started from 1932 when they made their test debut under C.K. Naidu, and up until 1967. And India had lost 15 out of 19 test matches. So that is the kind of challenge that they had, that you're going abroad, your records are pretty much terrible. I mean, there is no sign of a win. And these guys actually go on and win those two series against all odds, against all expectations. Yes, the West Indies were not as strong as they were in a previous era, or they were in the late 70s. If anything, that was the transition between those two sides. But still, to go there, fight all those mental barriers and win, and then do that in England. Remember, England had beaten Australia in Australia earlier in the year to win the Ashes. So they were undisputably the best team in the world. So that puts into perspective the kind of challenge that Wadekar and his men had in 1971, which is why it is a landmark year for Indian cricket.
Right. So you mentioned Wadekar getting hit in the head by Charlie Griffith. Was it Contractor, right?
Not Mary Contractor. Wadekar
Exactly.
10.62.
Right. So he got hit on the head and then there was Nawab Pataudi had to take over. But as I said, now a lot of our listeners, including us, we weren't around for that. Like even Sachin was born in 1971, right? So talk us through the protagonists of these dramas, right? From the let's start with the Indian team. You've talked about the Nawab Pataudi. He was like a legendary kind of princely cricketer, and he had one eye, lost one eye in a car accident, and he brought in the 4 spinners, the spinning quartet, who Aninda Datta, who was on our show as well, wrote a fantastic book called Spin Wizards, and he talks at great length about the Nawab Pataudi's contribution. Now, so he's obviously one main character. Set the stage for us. Tell us who the main characters were. Was the Nawab Pataudi playing this legendary 1971 year, or was he replaced, or was he kicked out? What was the politics behind the scenes? And tell us some of the main people that we are going to come across in this year 1971.
Oh, a lot of things happened, because 1971 India hadn't played test cricket in the year 1970 completely. There was no test cricket. So 1971, those two tours were in the offing. They knew that a lot of things depended on it. There was a Ranji Trophy campaign, Dilip Trophy. All eyes were on those tournaments to see who's going to do well. And there was a Dilip Trophy going on here at the Brabant Stadium, which is very close to where Sachin lives and very close to Sachin's heart. He's a member of the CCI. And I will let him take over the story in some time from me. Firstly, I will say Vijay Merchant, who was the chairman of selectors. He wanted Nawab of Pataudi out of captaincy. So, but then there was
and why was that?
He felt it was time.
He didn't like him. Or was he against the royals still ruling Indian cricket?
You know what? It's so funny you say that, because there is a conspiracy theory, and I say conspiracy theory, that Vijay Merchant was not happy with the fact that in 1946, when India toured England, he was passed on for India captaincy, and Nawab of Pataudi's father was made captain because of the royal background and everything. And Nawab of Pataudi Senior by then was well past his prime. He had played a few test matches for England, but that was over a decade ago before that. So Merchant had missed out on India captaincy. So apparently they say he wasn't happy about it. But again, that's all conjecture. But yes, they didn't get along. And 1969-70 was when, India had those home series against Australia and New Zealand. As many as 8 new players were given test caps during those 2 series at home. 8 new players were tried. So you could see that there was the
A bit like our
selectors.
last tour of Australia, actually. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, but that was forced. This wasn't forced. The chairman of selectors wanted to apparently do a lot of changes, make a lot of changes, and Pataudi, as such, there was a lot of talk about him. The fact that he also wasn't scoring the runs, so possibly they wanted to get rid of him. So Merchant as well. Now, as you know, that there was a 5-member selection committee with all the zones being represented, and so there was Merchant, who was for Ajit Wadekar being captain, and obviously Pataudi being removed. There were 2 selectors who were for Pataudi and 2 selectors who were against Pataudi, and the 5th one, who was for Pataudi, did not attend the meeting for some other reasons. And as a result, it was a tie. And then as chairman of selectors, Merchant put his casting vote and said that Wadekar is going to be the captain of the team. Now, Pataudi called Wadekar, congratulated him, and he said that he would be available for the tour. But the next day, he pulled out of the tour. And interestingly, that same year, he stood for elections. There was a general election that year in 1971, and he stood for elections from Gurgaon. And there's an interesting exchange between Wadekar and Pataudi that took place before the selection meeting at Sachin's beloved Brabant Stadium, which I will let Sachin actually narrate that story.
See, basically what happened was Wadekar, before the captaincy was announced, told Pataudi that he thought he'd be made captain and said to put a word in to see that he was selected on the tour, not knowing that there was something else that was being planned. And I'll tell you something in Vijay Merchant's defense. Merchant was looking to the future of Indian cricket. Now, Merchant being a Bombay person and being the president of the Cricket Club of India around that time, I think he became the president just after that, was also chairman of selectors, seen a lot of Bombay cricket, played for his beloved Fort Vijay. He played a lot against Wadekar, who was playing for Shivaji Park. And he saw a man with tenacity there, someone who was part of the Bombay cricket setup, tough guy. And about Bombay, in those days, the heart and soul of the cricket team of India was Bombay. A strong Bombay was a strong India. You'd always have 7 or 8 players from Bombay in and around the Indian squad at that time. And I thought that's the line he took. And that's how young Gavaskar made it to the team as a 21-year-old, who Merchant thought had a lot of promise. Gavaskar played for Dadar Union back in the day. And I think it was a very inspired selection on his part that Gavaskar went on that tour. It was Sardesai's last 2 tours, who was going but played all his cricket in Bombay. And it was very inspired selection on his part, and the rest is history.
Incredible. So we've obviously now come across 3 main characters. Nababa Pataudi, who's sitting in India. You've come to Ajit Wadekar captaining the team. Obviously, Sunil Gavaskar, a young 21-year-old, hasn't played a test match, and I think he's played four first-class games at that point, or maybe 5. I don't know. He hasn't played a lot of first-class cricket either at that point. Now, they go out to the West Indies, where they haven't, I think, won a test match ever. Talk us through the tour games, and then their 5 test matches right now. Gavaskar didn't play the first of those test matches, but who are the ones who contributed? Like we a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the India tour of Australia recently, and we went through the main performances and the highlights of that tour, starting with Rishabh Pant scoring 100 in a warm-up game, and eventually culminating in that famous win at the Gabba. Now, were there a lot of highlights of that tour? So could you walk us through some of those major talking points, controversies, issues that came up during the tour?
Yes, well, I mean, you have to start from the first game itself, because when India played Jamaica, and remember, there was one fast bowler that Jamaica had called Uton Dow, and Uton Dow was quite fast. He was tipped to be one of the next fast bowlers for the West Indies. And India, remember, was still carrying the hangover from the previous tour where their captain was hit on the head and all those things happening. So Wadekar walks in at number 3, and early in his innings, a ball rises and hits him on the hand. And he looks at his hand and there's blood. But he decides, I cannot go out. And obviously he was in pain. He decides, I cannot walk out now. And he bats for the next 4 hours. He bats for the next 4 hours, scores 70, has a great partnership with Dilip Sardesai, who scores 97. And Sardesai was also one of the players who was only picked because Wadekar, the new captain, put his foot down in the selection meeting and said, look, I want this guy on because he's someone I can trust and I know he will get the runs. Sardesai only made it to the team for the first game because Gundappa Vishwanath was injured and scored 97. Now Wadekar scores 70, stands up to this fast bowler, and his whole reason for doing that was to show the Indian team that however fast the bowlers are, we will stand up to them, look them in the eye, and show guts on the tour. And that is how the tour started. It just started with the captain standing up to one of their fastest bowlers and not flinching even when, and one of the things that I read in Wadekar's interviews was that he decided he's not going to open his glove and look at his wound. Because if he does, then that is going to psychologically break him. He only did that when he got out and went back into the dressing room. So the hand was bleeding, but he continued to bat. That's the kind of guts he showed. And the other person that we should definitely talk about, and I will let Sachin talk about him, because Sachin had the good fortune of meeting him many, many times over the years, and that is Dilip Sardesai, who was given the title of the Renaissance Man of Indian cricket because of his contributions in the West Indies.
I've known Dilip Sardesai since I was about 11 or 12 years old at the CCI. We used to have our members' kids' nets, and he'd always be there watching and chatting. Plus, his son was our senior in school, and it's someone we loved. We just loved his cricket, and he'd be at the nets watching. And Dilip Sardesai was from Goa. He was born in Portuguese Goa, so way back, and he came to Bombay to play his cricket, and he was he was not only a very talented batsman, temperamentally very strong, and he was an absolute world-class batsman. And it's just apt that he finished his career on those 2 tours of India. I think it was between Chandu Bode and him to go on that tour. And Wadekar he put his foot down because they all played a lot of cricket together. Sardesai never played in a Bombay Ranji Trophy losing team ever. Every time we have played, Bombay has won the Ranji Trophy championship. He does not know, he never knew what it was to lose in a Ranji Trophy game. That's how strong Bombay cricket was. And what Wadekar rightly picked him, the heart and soul of the team was Bombay. Gavaskar, Solkar, Wadekar, Mankad. I mean, it was a very, very strong presence. I think Abdul Ismail also, if I remember, narrowly missed selection on that tour. And India tried to get another Bombay player on that tour, someone who was born in Bombay, a guy called John Jameson, who played against us. He was a cathedral school. He studied in Bombay in cathedral school, then moved back to England and played his county cricket there. But we had the Indian Cricket Board had asked him to come and play for us, but he chose to play for England, and he got 100 against us in the tour game on that trip. So we had a very strong Bombay team, and what Sardesai brought a lot of belief to that team. He was there. I mean, Sardesai would say in his typical Maharashtrian style, "Ye to Popadwadi bowling attack aaye." My Marathi is not good. And he gave confidence to the people around him. And he led by example with the runs he scored. And he went out on a high on those tours. He's a very fine man. And he did a lot for Indian cricket over the years. Even after he finished, he was selector of Bombay. And he was always around the nets, spotting talent and watching cricket. So I remember 7:15 in the morning, I'd gone to have tea. We had what was called a breakfast table at CCI. Raj Singh Dungarpur, Hanuman Singh, Dilip Sardesai, Indrajit Singh, all former cricketers. And Dilip Sardesai came very charged up that morning and said, I have to go and see a very young cricketer. So I remember driving him in my Fiat to Karnataka Cricket Club. And he had taken me to see a young Kiran Pawar who played for Bombay under 19 and played a little bit for Bombay. Ramesh Pawar's younger brother, stylish batsman. And I remember Sardesai had spotted him back in the day, and he was so enthusiastic at 65, 70, wanted to go and watch the young under 19 batsman bat. That's the kind of love they had for Bombay cricket, the enthusiasm they had, and that's what Bombay ethos of Bombay cricket was all about here. He was fascinating character, great sense of humor, loved his cricket, and he was a great batsman.
Incredible. And also, we must remember at this time, there are no helmets. There is no restriction on the number of bouncers in an over. I think beamers were not restricted at that stage as well. And there were plenty of bowlers that could produce an effective beamer on demand. So pretty courageous of Wadekar to stand out there. Of course, now we've been introduced to Dilip Sardesai. We've talked about Solkar. Vinu Mankad was it Ashok Mankad, not Vinu
Ashok
Mankad.
Mankad.
Ashok Mankad, right? He would be out there. So that's happened. Now let's move to the test matches, right? So 5 test matches. What was the eventual scoreline in this, Nishad? Where did we end up on the series score?
It was 1-0 only. 4 test matches were drawn, but you have to see that it was only in one test match that West Indies actually dominated. In all the other test matches, India had the better of them. Let's start with the first one at Jamaica. And the sense of humor that Sachin referred to about Dilip Sardesai, here's an example of it. Now, the Indian team is batting first, and it's a good shiny pitch at Sabina Park, and you've got all the Indian players who are touring for the first time watching, because the pavilion was square of the wicket back then, and they can see that the fast bowlers coming in. It was Van Burn, Holder, and Grayson Shillingford. They were coming in, they were bowling, and the West Indies wicketkeeper was taking the ball somewhere here, sometimes here, or here. And but a lot of these youngsters, they were used to seeing the wicketkeeper taking the ball somewhere here, around their waist, not above their head. So they are just looking, and for 2 overs, Dilip Sardesai is quietly watching all this. And remember, Sardesai was on that 62 tour when Contractor was hit on the head, and he was made to open the batting, by the way, on that tour after that. So Dilip Sardesai watches for 2 overs, and in very colorful Marathi, and I'm not going to use the words here, he says, what kind of fast bowlers are these? Hey, kasle dash fast bowlers ahet. That is the Marathi in the way he said that. And Sunil Gavaskar and the others, they say they look at him, and they see that a senior player is not bothered by this, and it just lifted their confidence, with that kind of sense of humor. And the most important thing is he walked the talk, because in the first test, when India were in dire straits, having lost 5 wickets for nothing, he scored 212, got lower order partners, 2 lower order 100-run partnerships. That's not all. Then India also imposed the follow-on for the first time against the West Indies, just as a psychological trick. The test match was going towards a draw, and it was the first day was washed out. 4 days of play was on, and the playing conditions said that if it's a 4-day test match, then for 200, then the deficit required for follow-on is not 200, but it's 150. So I think India were leading by 170 odd, and then instead of going to the umpires, Wadekar goes to the West Indies dressing room first and says, you have to follow on, just as a psychological trick, so that they are a little stunned. In the second test at Trinidad, that's where Sunil Gavaskar made his debut. It was Salim Durrani who turned the test match in the second innings. Venkat Raghavan took 5 wickets. Sardesai got 100 in the first inning. And India won that test match. They chased down a modest total of 120. And then again drew the game in the third test at Guyana. The fourth test at Barbados, that's where it gets interesting, because that's when India actually had their backs to the wall. It was Wadekar's birthday, April the 1st. It was his 30th birthday. He won the toss for the first time on his birthday in Test cricket. And guess what he does? He puts West Indies into bat, when a lot of people felt India should have batted, and West Indies score over 500 runs. And then again, India reduced to 70 for 5. Dilip Sardesai scores 150 again over there to rescue India. And then India managed to avoid follow on in the second innings. Sunil Gavaskar scored another 100. And you've got the last test at Trinidad where India sealed the series because the series was still in play. It was a 6-day test match, and Gavaskar got 100 in the first innings and a double 100 in the second innings, battling toothache all along. He had a terrible toothache, and India ensured that the series was in the bag. So that is to sum up what happened in a nutshell. But there are a lot of stories around the kind of bravery and guts that these guys showed right through.
Incredible. I have a couple of questions. One being, who were these batsmen that Dilip Sardesai was batting with to score these immense runs? Because you're 70 for 5, you're batting with number 7 onwards, right? So who were these guys lower down the order that were able to bat with him for such long periods and help India get back into the game?
So it was Eknath Solkar mainly. Eknath Solkar got a 50 with him in Jamaica in the first test, and he did the same in the fourth test at Barbados. And the interesting thing about the Barbados, and I'll tell you two stories that we have included in our book. In the first series, in the first match at Kingston, the ball was, Solkar was having a tough time in the middle, and West Indies were not happy with the condition of the ball, and they were going to the umpire trying to change. So Sardesai and Solkar are like, let's get into the discussions, because that's when we will, we can influence, and so that we can keep that ball with us instead of them getting a newer ball. So then they were just trying to influence the umpires, and then finally the umpires changed the ball because the ball had really gone bad. And later Solkar goes up to Gary Sobers and says that, can I have a look at the ball? So Sobers tells him that, what's the point? You're just playing and missing everything. So Solkar just looks at him and with a straight face says, you play your game, I will play mine. And there were such exchanges as well. And then mind you, he's talking to the greatest all-rounder possibly the game has seen. And then you've got another incident at Barbados where Sardesai and Solkar didn't want the fast bowlers to come back into play because they were finding the spinners a lot easier. So Sardesai tells Solkar that, let us act as if we can't read the googly bowled by the spinner. Let's just act. And then that will delay the West Indians will think that they are getting the better of us. They'll keep the spinner on and delay the new ball. And that is exactly what happened. West Indies delayed the new ball, didn't get the fast bowlers back into play, and these two continued to build the partnership, playing and missing a few on purpose, just to show that they are struggling and to trick the West Indian team.
This is incredible. Obviously, we're called Edges and Sledges, so good sledging story is always one that we enjoy. The Gary Sobers sledging a batsman. I mean, they must have been pretty desperate to get a wicket. But the other question I had was, who are the West Indian bowlers? Now, we know the pace quartet from the 80s and the late 70s and the 80s that Clive Lloyd put together. But and you talked a little bit about, was it Jason Doe or what was his name?
Uton Doe.
Sorry?
Uton Doe.
So who were the main quicks that the West Indies had? Did they have spinners? What were the pitches like in the West Indies as well? Because we've seen those evolve as well over the years, because you've seen them, they were quite fast and pacey back in the day, and now they've become more spin friendly. So talk us a little bit through the bowlers as well as the pitches.
So when it comes to Trinidad and Guyana, they were a bit more spin friendly, but you had Barbados and Jamaica, which had something in it for the fast bowlers, especially Barbados. That's where India had faced those fast bowlers. So West Indies was a team in transition. They didn't have the greatest of bowlers. Sobers was one of the bowlers, obviously, but he was an all-rounder. He could bowl anything, from pace, spin, and everything. They had fast bowlers like, you had Keith Boyce, I think, played one of the test matches. You had Grayson Shillingford and Vanburn Holder, who were also the fast bowlers. Uton Doe was brought in for the fourth test match. He was considered to be fast. By the way, later on, what happened sadly is that he had pace, but he didn't have direction. And later, a few years later, when he got hit all over in a test match, the West Indies crowd had come up with a slogan that one of the commandments in the Bible is that thou shall not bowl, because of the way he was hit in a test match. So they weren't a great. Yeah.
And this Dinda Academy type stuff has been there for a really long time. All crowds are mean.
Oh, there is a lot of mean stuff that did happen, but Indians were very sporty as well. And you had the spinners. Lance Gibbs was around, but he played only one of the test matches. There was a guy called Jack Noriega, and Jack Noriega took 9 wickets in one of the innings in Trinidad. But India won that test match. So that spell is forgotten a lot of the times. So those were the bowlers that West Indies had.
And Sachin, who were the Indian bowlers that took the wickets? Because we've talked a lot about batsmen, like the Indian cricket fans that we are. We love our batsmen. We've talked about the double hundreds and the 150, but to win test matches, you need bowlers who are capable of taking 20 wickets, as Virat Kohli has said enough times now, right? So, who were the bowlers that we had that took those 20 wickets and won us the series eventually?
I tell you, Durrani took two crucial wickets in one game, and I think that was a game changer. Our fast bowling attack, we had Sunny Gavaskar who opened the bowling at that stage for India.
Sorry,
Solkar bowled.
Sunil Gavaskar opened the bowling for India as well.
Yes, and bowled first change as well in one of the test matches.
Incredible. I wish I was born in the 70s.
So we were basically playing one fast bowler, and we had Bishan and Chanda. Our spin quartet were there, and that's when we got a lot of our wickets. Solkar bowled a bit, so it was a bit of a mixed bag with our bowl. But it was Durrani who got us crucial breakthroughs in one of the games. I think he had Sobers and Nishad. Who was the second one he had? He had one more consecutive.
The man who wrote our forward, Clive Lloyd.
Successive in an over, he had both of them. Absolute game changer. So I mean, we were a batting centric team with everyone chipping in with the ball.
And you also have to remember that the spin quartet as such was also broken for the West Indies tour because Chandrasekhar was not taken to the West Indies. He only came in later for the England tour. But you have to one of the spinners who's not remembered as much or not given as credit, or there is no halo of the wizardry around him, was S. Venkatraghavan, and he took 5 wickets in the second innings after, with Durrani getting those 2 crucial strikes, and that bowled West Indies out in the second innings of the second test, and then India had not much to chase in the 4th innings there.
And so most of our generation remember him as the umpire that gave it out sideways.
Yeah.
Venkatraghavan was more in what in football terms you describe as a holding midfielder. He's someone like a Jordan Henderson at Liverpool who'd block one end, play that holding role, keep it accurate, keep it tight. While Bedi, Chandra and Prasanna had the flair, Venkat was the steady one. I always called him the holding midfielder of cricket.
Superb. Now we've obviously talked about some of the batting. We won 1-0 in the West Indies. Huge innings victory, huge series victory for the Indian team. Who was the man of the series? Who was picked as the man of the series? Was it Sunil Gavaskar for his I think 774 runs in only 4 test matches, right? Which is a staggering number.
It is an absolutely staggering number, especially breaking into international cricket for the first time. And you score 774 runs, 250s on debut, then 100 at Georgetown in the 3rd test. In the 4th test, he gets 100 in the second innings. And in the 5th test, it was sublime. I think 124 in the first innings. And then he got 220. Yeah, 220, yes, in the second innings, to help India draw that game. And 774 runs. So mind you, there was no official man of the match or man of the series awards back then. But the Trinidad Cricket Council had given Sunil Gavaskar a trophy that was around this big. And he actually, when they landed back in the West Indies and when they landed back in India from the West Indies at Bombay Airport, 15,000 people had come to receive them. And Gavaskar was made to display that trophy to all the people who had come. So that was recognition of the fact that he was the man to watch out for. But as we always say, Dilip Sardesai with 642 runs was equally crucial, if not more, because all those runs also came when India were in tough situations.
I mean, 642 runs is equally staggering if you didn't have the 774.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be, we think of Virat Kohli 593 on the England tour, which is the most recent kind of huge scores I can think of. But I mean, to get 642, I think Alistair Cook has once got 800 on an Ashes tour. But this is just, I mean, for 2 batsmen to coincide and scored that level of runs is just absolutely brilliant. So before we go to a CH strategic timeout, Nishad, I'm going to ask you. There's lots of anecdotes, I believe, in your book. I think 71 of them in
Correct.
homage to the year 1971. So, can you tell us one anecdote from the your favorite anecdote, perhaps from the West Indies leg of the fairy tale year that was 1971, and then we'll go into a break and come back and talk about the other half.
All right. So my favorite anecdote from the West Indies leg of the tour would be when India was in I think Georgetown, Guyana, and Gary Sobers had a tough time as a batsman until then, and then India sensed that if they again put pressure on the West Indies, they could possibly go on to win the Test match again. But Sobers was not given out to a pretty good bat pad catch, which in those days, no neutral umpires. Salim Durrani, in a rare fit of emotion, sort of showed his disgust and looked at the ground and was like something like this. And Dilip Sardesai was the one who had, claimed that catch. And Sardesai was not the best of fielders, by the way. So he then apparently told Sobers that, Gary, why didn't you walk? It was my first catch. So, that was the kind of banter they had right through. And Gary Sobers just looks at him with a straight face and says, I didn't hear what you said. And the entire Indian team listened to it around the bat and they were just laughing. And that's all they could do. And it also showed the kind of camaraderie they had. That was the West Indies leg. But I think even Sachin should pick one of his favorite anecdotes from the West Indies leg, because there's just so many of them, and the West Indies crowd just gets the best out of you, doesn't it?
Yeah, go for it, Sachin.
Yeah, see, mine is a very non-cricketing anecdote of the tour. It's about the vegetarian food that people like Jayanti Lal were provided by people like Rohan Kanai. Rohan Kanai would have originally been from, I think he was Rohan Babulal Kanai. So the Indians struggle with non-vegetarian food, and it is because that they're players of Indian origin in the team. And Guyana and at that time Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago had a higher density of Indians than the African descent. So there was a lot of support for the Indian team, and the camaraderie that existed that an opposition player would be getting vegetarian food for someone is something that's absolutely fascinating. Also, for me, the emergence of Gavaskar, who, as far as I'm concerned, is a cricketing god. You put all cricketing gods on one side, you put Gavaskar on one side, he is God. For him to have come into that team, gone into that test match, got his 65 and 67 not out, cemented his place and gone on from there to build a career over the next 17 years. For me, it was the start of something great. So for me, the emergence of Gavaskar itself, it might not be an anecdote of the tour, but it was a game changer in our cricketing history. It was so important that I would reckon many Indians got runs before him, but he was the first ever proper world-class batsman that India produced, a world-class cricketer that India produced. Then emerged the Tendulkars, Kapil Devs, and the rest of that. Gavaskar was our first proper cricketing icon at a different level.
And I'm sure you'll cover this in your book, but he was also dropped by an absolute cricketing god, Gary Sobers, in his first innings as a test match player. Apparently a dolly catch. He came on, I think, Gaurav Kapoor's podcast and talked about how Gary Sobers dropped him on debut, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, incredible story.
You can't mess with destiny.
And we've got to add another story is Kenya Jayantilal opened the batting for India in the first test at Kingston because Gavaskar was injured, and he got to 5, and he had scored a lot of runs in domestic cricket. A lot was expected from him. And guess what happens? On 5, he slashes at one outside the off stump. Gary Sobers at second slip flies to his right and takes an absolute blinder. And Kenya Jayantilal never plays Test cricket again.
Can you imagine? I mean, it's destiny. It's luck. I don't know what you call it, but it's just the story, it is written, right? It was written that Gavaskar would go on and score 34 test hundreds, be the top scorer in test cricket for a while before Border broke his record. Just absolutely incredible. On that note, guys, we have talked about the West Indies leg of the 1971 year, and we're now going to come back after this Seat strategic timeout, and we're going to talk about the England leg where India repeated that fairy tale of winning a series overseas. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back straight after this break. Welcome back from that break, guys, and you're still in conversation with the authors of Twice Upon a Time, the fairy tale of 1971. We're here with Nishad and we're here with Sachin. We've just talked about the West Indies leg of the tour. So after the West Indies, did the team fly to England from there? Did they take a ship? How do people travel back in the 1970s?
India returned back. They came.
Oh, they went back home.
Yeah,
Okay.
they came back home in early May because the England tour was to only start towards the end of June. So they came to India and there were changes in the side. Chandrasekhar was brought back in. Farooq Engineer was not on the tour to the West Indies. He was brought back. Now, that was because of a funny rule that the board had, that those who were residing in India and playing Indian domestic cricket can be picked. But at that time, Engineer was already playing for Lancashire. So he wasn't, so on that tour, he was not picked for the West Indies. But now it made cricketing sense to pick a guy who's got experience of English conditions. So he was picked. And funnily, India were to leave on the 14th or 15th of June to go, 1971, to go to England. But an astrologer who had predicted India's success in the West Indies looked at the charts and said, don't leave on those days. Leave on the 17th of June because that's going to be lucky for you. And the Board of Control for Cricket in India agrees. Now, cricketers are superstitious. We get that. But imagine the board says, all right, the astrologer has said that we have to leave on the 17th June. They actually deferred India's departure date by 2 days. And India left on the 17th of June, 1971, with the 23rd of June being the first tour game. So yes, India had come back. Then they flew down to the Caribbean, to England. And that's how, and by the way, even on the way to the West Indies, they had flown by England and US, and then they had gone to the West Indies. So no ships, they had all traveled around by air.
And even today, I think when India does come to England, they try and fit in a tour to the West Indies from here because it allows them, because England's quite a intense tour. So they go to the West Indies after to enjoy some sunshine and some beach. But anyway, so they're back in England. This is a 3-test match series, right? It's not a, well, firstly, why is it not a, it's now a 5-test match series. We're seeing India come to England. Why is it not a longer test series, Sachin? Is there a reason why we only get 3 tests against England?
In those days, though there was nothing written, they were major and minor countries in test cricket. So we'd always land up sharing the summer with Pakistan. So Pakistan would play 3, we would play 3, and we'd go every 4 years and play. So we went in 71, we went in 75, we went in 79, then we went in 82. Then when the Indian cricket had more clout, we moved towards 5-test series. Yeah, that became later and towards the, not even until the 90s. Also, we were playing 3-test series with England. It's only in the 2000s we've emerged into 5-test series with them. It's because of contractual obligations, preference for the Ashes, because those are relationships that preceded India playing cricket as a nation. So they were playing Ashes series way back from 1880s, 1890s. So they had these very traditional series in place, and it was very difficult for the new countries to come to. Even New Zealand till today play only 2 and 3 test matches in England, which has gone on. South Africa played 4 sometimes, otherwise even they are 3. It was only West Indies that played 5, England that played 5, Australia that played 5, and it's later the others started emerging, and West Indies have now gone to playing 3 rather than 5-test series in England. It's the way it's the tradition of the game. I need to remember, the ICC in those days was not the International Cricket Conference. It was done out of Lords. It was called the Imperial Cricket Conference. So the MCC basically ran the ICC, and the England team was called MCC in those days, Marylebone Cricket Club, of which I'm a very proud member. But it was called the MCC team, and the Test and County Cricket Board just ran cricket, but the team was called MCC. It was never said India was playing England. It was always known as the MCC Tour of India. So these are traditions of the game.
And
And
the
let me
MCC
also
still
add,
survives, doesn't it, as a separate team from the England Cricket Board's team now, because the
Yeah,
members still put out their own teams.
yeah, they have on any given week they're having about 14 to 15 games all around the country. They play a lot of social cricket. They play against the schools. They play friendly games. They play a few serious games, and the MCC puts out a side against the county champions every year, which is held in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, which at some stage will be played in India, I reckon also. So
Yeah,
the
and they trialed the
MCC,
pink ball, I think, in one of those games as well, because they wanted to play day-night first class.
they trialed the pink ball then, and the MCC has basically pioneered the pink ball. So there, I mean, I remember John Stevenson had sent pink balls across to India, and we were trialing them at various nets, whether to use the Duke's ball, the Kookaburra ball, or the SG Test pink ball. So basically, MCC now are the guardians of the laws of the game. So that's why people who want to play with a bamboo bat cannot play because the law says willow. So they still are the guardians, and we need a strong MCC. It's for the good of cricket. I think they have a lot of value that they still provide. They are guardians of the spirit of cricket, and there's a lot of good stuff that they still do with cricket.
Interesting. So we're now back to after that slight deviation. We're back to 1971. So Wadekar
Sorry,
and team
yeah,
land in England.
yeah. Please.
What happens then? Do they play tour games? Now we're acquainted with most of these characters. So what happens then? Do they play tour games, or do they go straight into test matches like they do these days?
no, they've got a huge list of tour games here. Because I've got to tell you that in those days it was like this. The Tour of England is not is is not just the test matches. You go around and play all the counties as well. And India, before the first test, played a lot of county matches. And I will tell you the exact number of games. Just give me a minute, because it was quite a long tour for the Indian team. And you started with the first game at Middlesex, at Lords against Middlesex, and then you just went around and you played so many of these counties. So before the first test itself, India had played Middlesex, Essex, a DH Robins 11, Kent, Leicestershire, Warwickshire, Glamorgan, Hampshire. And it was only a month later that they played the first test. In all, they played of the wait, I've lost count actually, but they did play many first class matches. And in between those test matches as well, they played those tour games. If anything, it should tell you that after the third test, they won the third test, and the next day they were on the road and they played a first class game against Sussex. So that's how the tour schedule was packed. You were playing county games day in and day out. There was hardly any breather. And test matches were just one of those games, actually, although they were the biggest ones.
Very interesting, because it's quite a contrasting approach from today's day and age. But what is the so we've talked about the West Indies being a team in transition. Now, what was the how were the English team? Were they good? Were they in decline? Were they on the rise? What was the relative strength to the Indian team?
Sachin, would you take that or should I?
Go for it. I'll supplement you. You go for it.
So when you talk about the England team, they were undisputably the best team in the world then. Ray Illingworth
Oh, wow.
Illingworth was a very shrewd captain. He'd got a fast bowler with him called John Snow, who had established himself as the best fast bowler in the world. He had got batsmen like Brian Luckhurst, Basil D'Oliveira. Jeff Boycott was around, but he played only one test match. Then you had others such as Keith Fletcher, who were also around. So that team was really strong. You had Derek Underwood, who was really a good spinner, especially on wickets that had crumbled. And this English team had gone to Australia earlier that year in 1970-71, and they had won the Ashes in Australia. And Jon Snow was the star over there, having taken 31 or 32 wickets. So this was without a doubt the best team in the world. So India were up against a team that was so well led by Ray Illingworth, a stalwart of the game. And that is the challenge that they face. Everybody was like, fine, you beat the West Indies, which is a team in transition. But this is the real test.
And what part of the year were they? What part of the summer were they playing the cricket in? Because obviously the earlier part of the summer in London or England, where I live, is wet. The pitches are greener. There's more grass on it. It seems around a little bit more. But the latter part of the summer, there's supposed to be, it dries up. The sun bakes the pitches. It's better to bat on. So basically, batsmen hide till about August, and then they come out and make hay for that 1.5 months between August and September. So when were these test matches scheduled in the English summer? Sachin?
We played in the second half of the summer. I think Pakistan had the first half of the summer, and we got. I reckon we got the better of the pitches than them. And I mean, we took confidence in from the West Indies tour into the England tour. And there's a very interesting story about John Jameson. And John Jameson studied at Cathedral School in Bombay, grew up in Bombay, and India tried to get him to play for us in that series and a little before, but he refused. He wanted to play for England. And Nishad, correct me if I'm wrong, he got runs against us in a tour game. He scored quite heavily against us in the tour game on that trip. And I think it was the next tour where he played against India. On the 74 tour, he played against India.
No, he played on the same tour, in fact, in 71 itself. And he scored 231 against India. So, but India still won that test.
But he
won that first-class game, rather.
He was a hardcore Bombay boy. John Jameson, Cathedral, comes back for the Indians. Been a part, he's now suffering with kidney problems, goes for dialysis regularly, but he's worked for the MCC and he's a hardcore Bombay boy who played for England, but he said, right, England's my home country, I will play for them. And we were up against a very strong Indian team, and I think the difference between us, I don't think they could pick Chandrasekhar in that test match. I mean, we were pretty evenly matched teams, and I think he was the difference between us. And then that one spell of bowling is where I think we had the measure on them.
Okay, so let's get to that spell of bowling then, because the first test match, where is that played? What happens? First two are drawn, obviously.
First test match at Lord's, the home of cricket, and that is where it's a very it's a well fought test match. And on the last day, with about 4.5-5 hours of play to go, India are left with the magic number of 183 to get. Now, 183 is very, very special in Indian cricket, Dhananjay, and I know the readers will be able to remember why 183 is special, because obviously that was the total that was defended by India in the 1983 World Cup final. And then, of course, you've got individual batsmen getting those scores who have gone on to left an indelible mark for Indian cricket. But yes, coming back to Lord's, so India were chasing 183 in the first test, and you've got Gavaskar, you've got Engineer, and Wadekar actually spoke to the weatherman. Now, the fact that the weather forecasts in England have always been very accurate. So the weatherman told Wadekar that it's going to rain at so and so time, and these guys then decided to have a go at the total. They were not going to let it just slide, so they had a go at the total. India lost wickets early, but then you had a partnership between Gavaskar and between Engineer, and up to 183. They went up to around 87 for 2, and they looked well on course. But then they started losing wickets. And then with India 38 runs away and England 2 wickets away from victory, the heavens opened up and it started raining. And it was a draw. India believed that they had a chance. England felt they had a chance. So pretty much they go out with honours shared. But when you go to the second test at Manchester, that's where India actually got out of jail, because they completely again had their backs to the wall, chasing a big target in the second innings, and they were 50 odd for 3, and it rained on the entire last day. So India didn't have to bat, and that's why it was a draw. And Manchester was a tricky place. It was seaming around, and Gavaskar got a 50 in the first innings, which he still rates as one of his best innings ever, because it was in very tough conditions.
Wow, wow, amazing. And the only thing I would say is Lord's still the home of cricket? Because it seems like the AGS Bowl may be the home of cricket with the World Test Championship final being played there. I find it quite amusing. I don't know about, maybe we can come back to the current, but what do you think? I mean, we've got a test match starting at Lord's, and we're recording this on Tuesday, but it starts tomorrow against New Zealand. But the World Test Championship final is being played in the AGS Bowl. What's happening, Nishad?
Well, I I think it's because of the current conditions. I think they've ICC with all the protocols, they had to make the call earlier. Having been around bubbles, that's what I can tell you, because you've got to be very specific in terms of getting those bubbles together. But if you're talking about tradition, let Sachin take over, because he's been to Lords and he's also very well acquainted with Hampshire. So he can tell you a bit about this kind of tussle, because he knows club members from both of those institutions.
It's very one-off. The AGS Bowl is very one-off because it's got a hotel on site. And Rod Bransgrove, it's called the AGS Bowl now. It was called the Rose Bowl before. Hampshire used to play elsewhere, and Rod Bransgrove, it's his entire money that has run Hampshire cricket, and he's built Rose Bowl. He's a philanthropist who's absolute cricket nut. He plays a bit of music, has released a CD, and his love and passion in life is Hampshire cricket. So his idea was always to build a hotel on a stadium, and that's what he's built. And in COVID times, that's where it is. Lords will always remain and will always be the home of Indian cricket, like the Brabant Stadium and the Cricket Club of India is in Bombay. Maybe Test cricket has temporarily gone out of CCR, and it'll come back. We are still the home of Indian cricket. Tradition.
What is the home of Indian cricket? Lords?
No. Cricket Club of India, which is the
Cricket Club of India. Okay, I was gonna suggest Eden Gardens maybe, but okay, Wankhede Cricket Club of India.
I will send you my book on Eden Gardens, but Cricket Club of India, we are founding members of the BCCI. This is where cricket did not start here, but we are the home of Indian cricket.
And the CCI has on-site rooms and all and everything.
Yeah,
you had people living there while playing test matches back in the day, right?
Keith Miller used to be be in his room and go down to bat from there. I will not say what some of the West Indies legends were up to in their rooms and what they were up to before they did when they went to bat. But that's what the CCI was, yeah.
Amazing. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, again, we've managed to deviate back to the third test match at the Oval Cricket Ground. This is the famous win, right? Sachin, tell us about what unfolded in this test match. The two teams have had fairly close contest, both test matches drawn so far, one at Lords, one at Manchester. You come to the Oval, which is three tube stops from where I live, which is a fantastic cricket ground. It's got an atmosphere which I think beats almost every ground that I've been at. When it's full and it's heaving, it's great fun. So what happens at the Oval Cricket Ground in this third test match in 1971 with the series at stake?
Two words happen, Bhagwat and Chandrasekhar. That's it.
And for our listeners who don't know who he is, tell us about him. Tell us about his arm. Tell us what he bowled, because again, lots of us haven't heard of him.
He was a leg break bowler who had a bit of polio, and he used that to his advantage. He was like a fastish kind of bowler. Kumble, I would say, would be the closest to him. And Chandrasekhar was a great fan of Mukesh's songs, and when he wasn't playing cricket, he was hearing Mukesh's songs, and he wasn't hearing Mukesh's songs. He was bowling his leg spinners. He could bat to save his life, but all that unleashed on him. He's one of the nicest men on the planet. I've had the good fortune of meeting him a couple of times, and one of the books I've written, which is called Fortune Turners, on Bedi, Chandra, Prasanna, and Venkat. He's one of the main characters of that book. He's just such a likable man from anyone who knows him. I don't know him so well, so I cannot claim to personally know him. But what happened to India that day was the fielding of Eknath Solkar and Bhagwat and Chandrasekhar, and that's what it was. Yeah, it was Chandrasekhar's that one spell of bowling.
Was it six wickets?
Yes, 6 wickets. 6 wickets, and we also must. I'm very glad that Sachin has mentioned Eknath Solkar, because his fielding across the two tours was phenomenal. He could take absolute blinders. So even like there was one catch in that Oval Test, and Chandra used to come very fast off the bat. He just would dive forward and take those quick catches, and those would actually change changed the complexion of the game, standing at short leg. In the second innings, thanks to a 6 for by Chandrasekhar, England got bowled out for 101, and India only needed to chase down 173, which they took their time and they did it then.
But even
We held our nerve
173
is
is a
what I
tricky
would say.
target. Tricky target.
It was.
We held our nerve.
Yeah, they had to hold their nerve. They still had a lot of time, and Ajit Wadekar was at it again, scored 45, and towards the end of the penultimate day, early on the last day, he was run out, and just as he was walking off the pitch, he saw that some of the Indian fans had smuggled in a baby elephant from a nearby zoo. And it was Ganesh Chaturthi that day, and Wadekar, being Maharashtrian, just looks up at the sky and says that Ganpati Bappa, please help us win. And the team manager tells him that, you know what, there is an elephant on the field of play. Today is Ganesh Chaturthi. It's going to be our day. So you don't worry. And Wadekar goes to the dressing room. It's a tense run chase. And guess what he does? He goes to sleep.
Wow. I'm
He
just
goes
trying to
to
imagine
sleep.
the scenes. I'm trying to imagine the scenes. There's an elephant that's on the field of play. India chasing 173 to win a series in England. Even now, if India is chasing 173 to win, everyone would just be biting their nails. But I mean, you talked about Chandrasekhar, Sachin, and there was a beautiful anecdote that Anindo Datta told us about him, who's also written a book about the spin wizards, and it was about how he beat Sunil Gavaskar. And then he walks up to him and he asks him, Suna. And then Gavaskar asks him, what? And he says there's a radio playing a Mukesh song in the crowd. And he starts singing the song and humming the song. And it's such a beautiful anecdote, which, I mean, I was just reminded of it when you were talking about him bowling the team out and being a lovely gentleman at the same time. It's just a different era of cricket, isn't it, almost? It's a different time. I don't know. Anything to say about that?
It was a very special time in Indian cricket to go there. Just imagine the pressure on the Indian team. You won in the West Indies. You're 170 runs away from a path-breaking series win, a paradigm shift. The kind of pressure that's on the guys, and they held in Abid Ali. Everybody. I mean, there were small contributions from everybody. Just to go there and go to England, you've won independence from them in 47. There's deep down, as much as we not say, there's always a mental block somewhere. You won't call it an angst. It's something at the back of our mind. We have to beat these guys. We have to beat these guys. You go there in 71 and do it. It's very big. And these were not professionals. These were all amateur cricketers. I mean, a couple of them played county cricket and played for a living. These were all amateur cricketers. I mean, some had jobs at various companies in those days, and you were hardly paid a pittance. But just the pride of going and playing for a newly independent nation. We were not even 25 years old during that series. We were 24 years old as a nation during that series. To go to a country that has ruled you for 300 odd years is it's romantic. It's fascinating. It's special. Different era. The romance of the game was alive then, which we need to rekindle again. And what our win in Australia did recently was bring romance back to the game there.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about. It's the romance of the game.
Exactly. And that's what my question for you is going to be, because immediately after that win in Australia, the question was, is this the greatest series win ever? And a lot of people said, maybe. But, we had 1971. And now they didn't say which series in 1971. They said 1971. But you guys have written the book about 1971. It sounds like it was the England series that was the bigger win, although it was a shorter series. Is that a fair assessment, Sachin?
No, I would say the West Indies, because you have Sobers, Gibbs. Nishad will say they were a team at their peak. West Indies are a team in decline, but beating the romance of beating West Indies in faraway islands. For me, it was the West Indies win, the emergence of Gavaskar. That's why I'll always have a soft spot for that win. But it's very unfair to compare what Ajinkya Rane's team did to what Wadekar's team did. The eras are different. The players are different. The odds are different. The pitches are different. So for me to compare the two wins is totally unfair. I mean, we've enjoyed both those series. We were too young to enjoy the other series. That would have been 2 months when the England series would have kicked off in 71. But just to have read Sunny Days and even Anindya Datta's book, which I think was a damn good book, Nishad and our book, to read Sundar Rajan's book and to read old Sports Week articles and then sit and watch this series with Nishad and me covered on our show on the series. We did a show with people like Jeff Lawson and all. It was fascinating. Both had their own strengths. Both gave us happiness. One in COVID times. One when you look back and read it, made you feel good about what your country has achieved. They're both very fascinating wins, and I would feel it's injustice to both to compare them. It's like I would never want to compare a Gavaskar to a Tendulkar. It's unfair to compare two great batsmen. It's very unfair. So that's my take on it.
Nishad, would you agree with that? Do you rate the West Indies win higher than the England win within the Wadekar era?
Within the Wadekar era, I would still think that for a newly independent nation, symbolically the England series was a lot bigger, because you look at it, when India won in the West Indies and they came back, they had 15,000 people at the airport. When India won against England, the flight was diverted to Delhi so that they could meet Indira Gandhi first, get felicitated at Firozshah Kotla, and then come down to Bombay, and where they got an open top motorcade from the Sahar airport, as it was known then, to the CCI. What scenes that we saw after the 2007 World T20 win. And I think that tells you what it meant for the country. But if you ask me as a writer to write this book, I enjoyed researching on the West Indies tour a lot more, because it just looked like these guys had gone there, but they were also chilling with the opposition. There was a lot of banter. There was a lot of friendships that were built on that tour as well. Like, for example, there is also Calypso on Sunil Gavaskar, which he didn't know about for 3 years. And that's what happened on that tour. And they loved Gavaskar that much. And, then there were so many other exchanges that, the crowds had with the players, and the kind of bonds also as they were built between the two teams. I think that is why West Indies, to research in terms of anecdotes, was a lot more special.
Incredible. And you guys can read all about this. Nishad, where can they find Twice Upon a Time, and where can they find you guys on social media and email, etc.? Do you want to let our listeners know where they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So Sachin and I are behind Niche Sports. So I have obviously spoken about Niche Sports earlier, and Sachin is my partner at Niche Sports. We run it together. It's something that we do with a lot of energy and passion for the sport that we have, with combining our experiences in the game. And that is where you can reach out to us at thenichesports@gmail.com. And yes, the book is available on Amazon in India. It's also available in the UK and the US as well on Amazon. Alternatively, in India, it's also available on Notion Press. So Twice Upon a Time, India's Fairytale cricket wins of 1971 is out there. Do grab your copies. And you can also follow Sachin and me on Niche Sports. We've got our personal handles, but Niche Sports is where both of us combine for this.
Absolutely fantastic. This has been a fascinating hour talking about the year 1971. Sachin, Nishad, thank you so much for joining us on the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure being educated by you guys on this immense year in the history of Indian cricket. We always think it starts from 1983. It's actually 1971 where where Indian cricket started its era of winning, and now which is translated into an era of dominance. So thank you for writing the book as well. I'll be sure to read it. And guys, please do grab your copies of the book. And we would love to have you back on whenever you can, guys. So until next time.
We can support your podcast. We are always there to back you guys. And hopefully I'll make it to England in August, and you can come and watch a proper team play football with me if you're a football man.
Absolutely. When you come over, do drop me a line, and we would watch cricket, football, whatever you want to do. I would just love to be back in a stadium. That's all. That's all. And Nishad, if you're in the UAE for the IPL, I'm hoping to fly over there in September if it recommences. So hopefully we will get to meet in person soon, guys.
Look forward to it, my friend, and greatly appreciate. I mean, I'm new to the podcast world, and all, but I'm enjoying it. Yeah, it's
Absolute natural,
with
Sachin.
Nishad, but it's just good to be on chatting cricket. Anytime you need any help, you need us to come and assist you guys. Always around there.
You guys are absolute natural. Nishad is a professional, of course. So
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having
guys.
us.
Absolute pleasure, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
God bless. Yeah. Bye.